What does progressive and radical Christianity look like? Today, I'm interviewing Reverend Michael Coren. Michael is an author, television and radio personality, columnist, and speaker. He hosted a nightly television and radio show for 15 years, for which he won numerous awards. He's a columnist for the Toronto Star and a frequent contributor to the Globe and Mail, Now Magazine, TVOntario, Macleans. He's the best-selling author of 17 books. Michael has received several awards for his writing and broadcasting. Michael graduated from Trinity College, where I graduated from as well, at the University of Toronto in 2019 with an M.Div honors, and was ordained in the Anglican Church of Canada in October of 2019, and is a Pastoral Associate at St. Christopher's Church in Burlington. Michael and I have known each other for many years, and we've done shows together a number of times. Some of them have been a little bit challenging, but Michael was never himself the challenge. It was sometimes maybe some of the guests that challenged me a little bit more than Michael did. But today, Michael is an amazing spokesperson for justice on so many issues, both inside and outside the church. So Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my very great pleasure, really.
Thank you. So Michael, congratulations on your ordination. Can you tell us a little bit about your calling and how that came about?
Well, about almost 8 years ago now, I had rather a radical, profound change of life. I'd always known Jesus, I think, but through a glass darkly, really. It was, my interpretation was rather a conservative one, as you know, including on issues of equal marriage. Excuse me. And I wasn't fanatical. I don't think I was ever hateful, but I think I did enormous harm. In some ways, I did more harm than the people who were extreme, because I gave a more reasonable argument and a more measured argument. So it's quite easy to dismiss some screaming, ranting hater, but if someone brings forward a more moderate, nuanced argument, it causes a great deal of damage. And I did that. And what's important, though, is to take ownership, I believe, of your error, of your sin, of your failing. And I had, as I said, a quite radical change of life almost 8 years ago for all sorts of reasons. Actually, it was on issues of equality, of sexual equality, that I changed. That was the wedge issue. And after that, other things happened. And it was really the galloping homophobia in Uganda. It was getting even worse. And when I spoke out about that, I was very shocked at the conservative Christian world, that I saw a homophobia that I hadn't seen before. This wasn't an opposition to equal marriage. This was a hatred of gay people. And that radicalized me. And well, actually, I wouldn't say it didn't radicalize me, it Christianized me. And so that, I suppose, is a form of radicalization. And the Jesus I came to know was a revolutionary figure. And I think that's the authentic Christianity. And it was a difficult time, painful in many ways. But I'm very glad. I'm glad it was then and not now, although there are still some ripples of that pain and abuse. But after a while, people encouraged me to go to seminary, which I thought was ridiculous. But in the end, I did, and went to Trinity and graduated. And I was ordained a deacon just over 2 years ago, and I became a priest just a couple of months ago in the Anglican Church. And I love it. I mean, I'm a very blessed, fortunate person. I still have my journalism, not as much as I used to, but as much as I want to. And but also I can fulfill my vocation as a priest.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you listened to the call and answered it, Michael. It's great to have you in with a new role, but bringing your expertise to that role. So in your book, Epiphany, A Christian's Change of Heart and Mind Over Same-Sex Marriage, you talk about the shift that you made. Could you share a little bit more about that shift?
Yeah, I was in the Roman Catholic Church for many years. And the fact is, the Roman Catholic Church, its teaching is draconian. Its teaching is vehemently homophobic. The Catechism speaks of dysfunction and disorder, and it's awful. However, I think we all know that there are many Catholics who don't follow that. I would say most Catholic, this country is about 40-odd% Catholic. I think most of them would have no problem at all with equal marriage, for example. But the church's teaching is still deeply homophobic. Also, at least half of Roman Catholic clergy are gay. There've been study after study about this. Many of them are in relationships, not all, certainly, but many are. So this open lie that, on the one hand, this is probably the biggest employer of gay men in the world, but has the most homophobic teaching of any major institution. And that's very difficult to reconcile. And with me, I argued frequently the case against equal marriage. Now, in my partial defense, I supported civil union. I supported full legal protection, inheritance, housing, employment, and so on. But as I say, I think it in some ways caused more harm because it gave a reasonable place for opponents of full equality to rest. I know it hurt people because they've told me. I had a change. The specific incident, it was Uganda was considering even more homophobic legislation where it could lead to the death penalty for simply being born gay. And this was shocking to me. And so I stood up publicly and said, as Christians, we have to condemn this. And I received a lot of abuse. And then another incident, my God, it seems such a long time ago. It was World Vision, and they had issued a statement that those in a same-sex relationship were welcome to work for the organization. Now, quite clearly, that didn't come out of a vacuum. There were a number of people in same-sex relationships working for World Vision, helping the needy, feeding the hungry, doing the most wonderful work. And just making that explicit, which was a noble thing to do, led to a backlash that I found shocking. And I've seen some pretty shocking stuff over the years, believe me. I couldn't believe it. The entire, well, almost the entire evangelical world turned on them and said, if you continue with this, we'll withdraw funding, which is a euphemism for, well, actually, what they actually said was, we'll have to reconsider our partnership, which means we take away funding, which means kids will starve to death. So unless you remove this beautiful statement of inclusion, children in need will die. And I remember going home and just weeping. And I thought, how can I stand with this section of the church, this section of the Christian world? This is horrible. And I spoke out about that, and this unleashed a huge wave of abuse, which opened my eyes to the reality of what was there. But at the same time, a lot of affection and love from gay Christians in particular. Gay people, but gay Christians in particular, who reached out to me. I met with them, we discussed, I learned a great deal. And so on the one side, there were these conservative, quite homophobic Christians abusing me. On the other, gay Christians embracing and loving me. I did a lot of reading and praying and came to some different conclusions. And then I remember the first column I wrote, well, I didn't actually advocate equal marriage. I simply made a public apology and called for a rethinking of the situation. It was a pretty much, when I read it now, that column, that was some years ago, my golly, that seemed very conservative. But you would not, well, maybe you would believe what happened after that. I mean, I was fired from jobs, speaking engagements. I mean, it was like the world gone mad. And of course, that just drove me further into speaking and standing up for what I believed. And so that's what happened. And then when you change on one issue, you change on others, but not all. You know, there are all sorts of issues I haven't changed at all on. But certainly when it comes to those social justice issues around sexuality and life, I think I have. I was always, for example, I was opposed to the Iraq War. I opposed the death penalty. I supported public medicine, forgiving third world debt. So people sometimes think I was this blanket conservative. I wasn't, but I was conservative on those moral issues. And I changed a great deal on those.
Thank you. And what's inspired you to write your two most recent books, The Rebel Christ and Reclaiming Faith, Inclusion, Grace, and Tolerance?
Well, Reclaiming Faith is a compilation of columns from about a 5-year period. That came out a couple of years ago, and that was the 5 years previous to that, since I had that change. But the current book, The Rebel Christ, is the one I'm most proud of. I wasn't going to write another book at this point. Ordination, busy in church. But Dundurn, a wonderful little publisher, not that little, they came to me and said, how do you feel about writing a 50,000-word manifesto of progressive Christianity? And this is, what? I mean, Ewan McGregor tells a story of when his agent said to him, how would you like to be in the new Star Wars? His response, I can't say because it the language is slightly rich. But yeah, and that is a book I would like to write, and I wrote it, and it is only 50,000 words, so it's hardly a huge text, but it goes over the issues of abortion and sexuality and social justice, economic fairness, and just tries to reposition Christianity in its authentic state, which is the Prince of Peace, Jesus, who called for a revolution of love, not this dark reactionary perversion that we see, particularly in the United States, but internationally. So that's why I wrote it, and I am very proud of it. It's where I stand, and I think it seems to be doing quite a lot of good. A lot of people in the church are reading it, but people outside of the church, because there are two places we have to deal with those in the church who maybe are not sure of what the belief system really is, but also those people outside of the church who would like to know more, but just see the hysteria of the right. And that's why, for example, on the very front, Stephen Fry gave me a lovely blurb. I mean, Stephen's an atheist, but what we tried, now I have other blurbs from various theologians, but I wanted to say to people, look, this is an important issue. Christianity matters, whether you like it or not. This is what it's really about. So I don't care what your religion is or your lack of religion. It's important that you understand what the teachings really mean.
You know, it's interesting because I read a few studies about people who don't go to church at all. And the studies can pretty consistently say that they do think the church has some answers. They do look to the church for some of life's big questions. Mm-hmm. They just don't like the delivery system of religion, churches, synagogues, and mosques. And so I think your book will be very effective at helping people outside the church wrestle with some of these issues. So
thank you. Well, I hope so. You know, there are those people who simply hate organized religion, and I meet them on social media all the time. But that's not typical, and there's an enormous commonality between progressive Christians and progressive atheists. This organized goodness and kindness. I mean, we want a better world. And there are always those people who write to me, oh, you believe in a sky fairy, you're this, you're that, normally misspelled. You know, whatever. I mean, that doesn't really matter. But an intelligent discourse on this issue is very important. And I know there are people, particularly in Canada, I think, who will say religion doesn't matter. That's a very sheltered, if I may, rather elitist response. Religion matters a great deal to the vast majority of the world's population, whether Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. And it might not matter to you living in Toronto or Montreal or whatever, but you're not the world. And so it is very important to understand what is really behind Christian teaching.
Yep. So to address a really current issue, how do you feel about people that use religious arguments against COVID vaccinations?
Mm-hmm. I've written a few columns about this. It's really brought into sharp focus the problems we face in the church. Now, it's a minority. You know, the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope has been very good on this. The Anglican, I mean, all of the mainline churches have been, and most evangelicals too. That should be said. But there's a fringe in the evangelical. Well, it's more than a fringe. There's a sizable minority in the evangelical church, and the right-wing fringe of the Roman Catholic Church, that either it denies COVID is real, or that they'll say COVID is a plot to control the world and reduce population, the Great Reset. They'll say that the vaccines are developed through cells of fetuses, and so it's abortion linked. And then there are those who go further and say, actually, the vaccines are part of the mark of the beast. And so various degrees of lunacy. Now, the anti-vax movement is not exclusively fundamentalist Christian, but right-wing Christians have a very, very important part to play in that movement. And you see it all the time. And they're very active, and churches insisting on staying open, which is so contrary to the teaching of Christ. Think of the most vulnerable, those who are most in need, those who are most likely to be hurt. As a priest, I spend a lot of time in hospitals and with people who are close to death and ill, and COVID is doing terrible things. And then this denial of science and truth, and this conspiracy neurosis that people have. So once again, this has displayed the church at its very worst. And obviously that's in media. I don't blame media for this, but media doesn't say, well, here's another very large church that is only limiting congregations to 60, even though they can take 500, that is reaching out to people, that is insisting on mask wearing. No, because that's generally what is happening, but they're going to concentrate, understandably, on those fanatics who say, we will open whatever. And then some minister in the States, I'm sorry, but they will die from COVID. And their family will say, we were wrong. Well, you should have known that earlier, because other people are going to die as well.
Yep, absolutely. So, Michael, how do you see the future of Christianity? Where's the hope? Where's the path forward to Christianity being embraced more? They did a survey of young people in Canada and US and asked them, when you hear the phrase Christian church, what comes to mind? And the top 14 most often repeated words were all negative.
Yeah.
Relevant, boring, judgmental, anti-gay, etc. It wasn't until you got to the 15th word, which was community, that you had one positive word. So it's a bit scary, in my opinion, if you look at that kind of a statistic, what the future of the Christian church looks like. So what do you think?
Well, I agree with you. It is. And community is very important, but you can find community in all sorts of places. I always think about sport, and particularly the sports that I love, and they tend to be European, forgive me, but like soccer. You go to a big soccer game and you will hear songs being sung that are the hymns of that place. They are known by everybody. In a stadium, which is a church, certain players are worshipped, almost messianic figures, tribal. I mean, community, you don't need religion to have community. It's nice that you have it, but that isn't the reason why you're there. And I agree with you. I think there is a very negative, and when young people are attracted to Christianity, in all honesty, it's generally not a progressive Christianity. There are a few people who are, and churches will say, look, we have this young person. Yeah, but if you want to see churches where there are lots of young people, because I've got to be honest about this, they're more conservative. I don't think they're extreme, but the growth is in these new evangelical churches that are not too bad on certain issues, but they're hardly fighting for full social rights. So it's going to be very difficult. I know that when I write a column in the Star or the Globe about Christianity, and I do quite often, I receive a huge number of emails from people saying, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm not that interested, but I didn't know this. Is that really what it teaches? There is interest there, and we mustn't exaggerate it. People are not searching every moment for answers, but many of them are. There are people who are asking questions, but I do a lot of funerals, and a number of the people involved are not Christian, but they want to talk about these things. They want certain answers. They want to ask a lot of questions. There's always hope. I get impatient sometimes. I have to watch myself. Impatient with some people in churches who they're very complacent. They know that numbers are declining, but they feel comfortable and they have a good position, and they're frightened. I remember being at one. I've never dreamed of naming this person, but it was I've got to be quite vague here. It was a meeting of some clergy, and someone mentioned social media, and she said, "Oh, I don't do social media." And I thought to myself, it's like saying I don't do the printing press. No, you don't really have that option. I'm not saying that you spend your whole day on Twitter, but you've got to promote your church online. You've got to take advantage of all these opportunities. These are open doors, Twitter and Facebook. They're the mainstream ones. You can't just say, no, I'm not involved in that. You have to be. And it can be a challenging world, but the church has to be part of that. And I know we can increase numbers, and I know we can do a great deal of good. And I wish we were better at representing ourselves in the public square. I mean, I'll be absolutely candid with you. We've known each other for years. I do a lot of media. It wouldn't surprise me if there were people in the church who agreed with me, but were uncomfortable with it. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't say anything. I mean, just they're good people, and they're radical in their views, but they're conservative in their approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes they're frightened. They're frightened of being out there, the light's on them. What's going to happen? Will I be criticized? I hope so. Will I be challenged? Hope so. Because if we're followers of Jesus, this life should be one that has some difficulties and challenges, and we have to defend our position. It's not meant to be cozy.
Yep, absolutely. I define myself sometimes as a progressive evangelical, and the progressive part people kind of get, but the evangelical part, I say, I think we've got good news. I think the world is there's an epidemic of hopelessness, and the Christian church at its best has provided hope.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that we need to be, more enthusiastic, just as enthusiastic as the radical right is about spreading the good news, that there is a place with progressive values and deep religious roots and wonderful traditions and a sense of community where people can be welcome to come and question and wrestle and journey together. And so
I agree. I mean, I wish that was the case, because the point about the Christian right is they are energetic. They are convinced they have the truth. And whenever on Twitter, for example, if I post something, certain things will trigger, and for 24, 36 hours, you'll be swamped with all these things from the Christian right. They're often very abusive and unpleasant, but there's energy there. And I wish we could replicate that amongst what I would call, I don't want to sound too condemning, but real Christianity, which is the Christianity of the Gospels. If we really went forward with energy, I think so many people would want to listen.
Yep. So, Michael, part of what Rainbow Faith and Freedom, my organization, is doing is trying to confront religious-based homophobia and religious-based transphobia, not by trying to change denominational positions, that takes too long, or fight for legislative change, but how do you change hearts and minds so that the average family won't kick their kid out, or the local faith community will still welcome people? Do you have any advice for us in doing this work?
Well, you could probably teach me, but I mean, it's interesting you say hearts and minds, because they are different things. Intellectually, there's a whole chapter on it in my new book, but the Christian homophobia really implodes because, I mean, it's not there. The theology simply doesn't add up. It's not in the text. There is no reason for it. There really is. I mean, the best we could say is, well, it's debatable, but this obsession with an issue that is so tiny within Scripture is really baffling. So, I mean, certainly we have to argue intellectually and theologically, but then, and you all have come across this, you get to a point where you realize that isn't going to work. And we've all, I mean, when I changed my position, people still say, oh, that's because one of his children is gay. Actually, they're not. We have 4 kids and they're all straight. I mean, I couldn't care less, but they're not. That wasn't the reason. And it was no one close to me who suddenly came out. It wasn't me coming. I mean, it just wasn't, that wasn't it. But there are all sorts of ways why people change their minds. And I mean, it's not for me to say really as a 62-year-old straight guy, but if someone realizes that a child or someone they love is gay and they change from their position, I don't think we should dismiss that. I think we should embrace it. Okay, I mean, it's come in a different way, but the point is change. You have change. You're willing to do that. And I know some wonderful campaigners for equality who only got into that position because a child came out to them. And their love, thank God, was stronger than their, well, I won't say hatred, but their discrimination. Love conquered. Here's an issue, and I mean, it's one we can't avoid. In the secular world, in the West, it's all going extremely well. People, I mean, I know there's an in-house and out-house argument now on trans issues, and I don't get involved in that. I'm simply not qualified. It pains me greatly to see some in the wider community, good people, arguing with each other about it, but it's not for me to, because it simply wouldn't be right. But generally speaking, if we look at North America and Western Europe, in the non-religious world, when I see it with our children, it's generational. They can't even comprehend homophobia. I mean, it's just not an issue to them. I mean, huh? I mean, and they wouldn't be in any way linked to a church, by the way, that exhibited any form of homophobia. They'd think it was appalling. Other parts of the world, it's more of an issue. But we have to, and I think we do, within organized religion, that's where the problem is. Not in all churches, but in some. And how do we change it? We just keep arguing away, but lovingly. Gandhi has that wonderful phrase about the evangelization of the rose. A rose doesn't preach, but it changes people by its beauty and its fragrance. And I mean, I certainly try my best not to react with anger, even though sometimes or quite often I'm personally attacked. I think if we can witness to people with love, tell the stories, and we are telling them of what true love is and dedication, things are going pretty well. Religion will, a lot of religion will follow suit. The Catholic world is a difficult one because although individual Catholics change their minds and views, the teaching is not, I can't see it changing. But the evangelical world, because it's more autonomous, I am seeing changes. What I'm seeing, and there are very few evangelical churches that are completely affirming. Once you do that, often you're thrown out. But what I am seeing is evangelical churches that won't talk about the issue anymore.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, they were deeply opposed to equal marriage, quite homophobic. Now they simply won't talk about it. Yeah. And I like to think the next stage will be changing their views. I was asked to come into quite a large evangelical denomination to speak about equal marriage. This is a few years ago now. And at the end of it, they didn't say, my golly, you're right. Well, they're going to change our view. But they were extremely polite and asked very good questions. And you could see that a seed had been planted. So I'm optimistic in that way.
Yeah, another piece of the research shows that among young people in North America, they no longer care about homosexuality or abortion. They care about poverty, the climate, justice issues. And so there's real hope in a younger generation of evangelicals. So Michael, I want to thank you for today. And I want to thank you for paying the price that you had to pay at times, because it's come to a place now where you're a very powerful voice for justice and for inclusion, and an amazing representative of the Jesus that you follow, that we follow together. And so I thank you for that. I thank you for your ownership of the past and your humility about where you're at on your journey today. And so I wish you well. And to our listeners or our viewers, if you found this interview helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and it really helps us. And don't forget to check out Michael Coren's links and information on how to order his books in the description below. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, really. It means so much to me.